In honor of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Grammy.com has gathered artists for a conversation surrounding their experiences in and out of the music industry. We have much to talk about in this very important conversation, so let's get started. On our panel, we have singer, songwriter, producer, and gamer mxmtoon. Hi.
Hello, I'm super excited to be here and happy to talk.
We also have singer, songwriter, and producer Tyler Shaw. Hi, Tyler.
Hey, how are you going?
And we have percussionist Taku Hirano. Taku, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I want to start with a big question. What do you think is the most misunderstood part of the Asian identity? mxmtoon, what do you think?
Oh, goodness. Well, there's a lot of misunderstood parts about Asian American identity and Asian identity as a whole. I say the biggest that I've personally experienced in my life is kind of subverting the stereotypes surrounding Asian women and a lot of preconceived notions that we are submissive and quiet and docile. And I am very loud and outspoken about a lot of things. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've faced is really just trying to push against those stereotypes that I think people often hold against Asian women as a whole. Mm-hmm.
I definitely think as far as like Asian men, Asian American men, somewhat the same thing. I don't know about docile, but weak, not necessarily masculine. And that's been perpetuated since the beginning of Hollywood. So, it's something that we definitely have to kind of fight against and change minds about. So definitely. And that does transfer into music as well.
Absolutely. I think a lot of like you said, Hollywood did a very good job at creating the stereotype for the nerd, the character who dies off first. But now, we're seeing some kind of change with Simu Liu being one of the first Asian Marvel characters, which is such a big turn of events, which I'm really happy for. So things are starting to change, which is good.
And we are celebrating AAPI month. But I'm wondering, do you think this term is helpful or harmful? What do you think, Tyler?
Well, seeing as I'm Canadian, American, Asian, Pacific Islanders, Canada's not in there. There's also, German Asian, there's UK Asians, there's a whole slew of different types of Asians. But that being said, I've actually never even heard the term until this year. So I don't know how long it's been around for, if this is a new thing, but I'm glad we have something to talk about now with the topic.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm an Asian American, and I think that that's something that I didn't grow up really actively thinking about was the inclusion of other Asian stories outside of just the Asian American experience. And I think AAPI is a very small step forward in the larger landscape of what it will be like to be inclusive towards Asians of all backgrounds. I think one thing I've noticed particularly with AAPI being the kind of grouping of the Asian experience is really the focus on East Asian storytelling. And I think that just showcases we have a very long way to go. Asian people are very diverse, and it's a very small umbrella for a very large group of people. So yeah, I think it's a step forward, but it's definitely not the leap that we need by any means. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I totally agree. Myself, I am a Japanese national and moved to the States when I was 3 months old. So I grew up culturally in a lot of ways as an American. I'm actually not even a naturalized American citizen. So I'm an API. But definitely, I think that AAPI, it's a small step. It does have a ways to go. I do know, especially here in America, that, some people of South Asian and Southeast Asian ancestry may have voice that they may feel a little left out because it is so East Asian centric. I think that's different in some places like the UK, where the term Asian oftentimes they think of South Asian immediately just because of their history within England. But yeah, so definitely it's a small step forward for sure, but a step nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
You're so right. I think there's a lot of things that happen. I think mxmtoon, you mentioned umbrella terms. With umbrella terms, a lot of people get left out. What do you think can be done about making the term more inclusive if someone is going to use the term?
Oh, I mean, I wish I could solve every single sort of problem we face as Asians in our communities, but I really think it's just about lifting up different stories. I think that it really comes down to when we're talking about representation, trying to give a really holistic perspective of what that means and recognizing the faults and the shortcomings we have when we choose which stories to uplift as well. Like, I think um, the sooner we realize that Asian experiences are very different and very diverse, and trying to showcase the diversity that happens among these communities and with the kind of journeys people have gone on, I think the better off we are. But it's hard when you're trying to think of a term, because umbrella terms are meant to kind of cover a large base of people. But how do you do that and also recognize the complexities that lie within it? Mm-hmm.
Totally. Oh, go ahead.
No, I said I definitely think that the more stories we share where people will be like, oh, I didn't even think of that person as Asian American or whatnot. I mean, there was just a recent poll where a large swath of the country couldn't name a prominent Asian American, and we have one in the White House as a vice president, right? So, obviously she's looked upon, Vice President Harris is looked upon also as African American, but just the fact that or same thing with going into music, like an artist like her, that a lot of people just see her as African American, don't necessarily know that she's Filipino American as well. So I think the more stories we bring out there, then people will be like, oh, okay, then it's more, you'll get more just inclusion as well as just more awareness, definitely.
Totally. And I think something that I've learned is that it's not just identity and national background, but in the United States also it's regional, right? Like the community in the Bay looks different from the community in LA. And so I think like it's also important to understand that just because one community doesn't mean they represent the communities across the nation, right? Yeah. Since COVID-19 became a part of our reality, we've seen a rise in anti-Asian rhetoric and crime. This has activists and figures in entertainment to speak up about the anti-Asian sentiment. But this is not the first time these feelings have come up. Case in point, the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps. Do you think enough people know about the history of anti-Asian sentiment in the US? What are your thoughts about this, Taku?
I think it's baby steps. I think more and more people are aware of it. I think that, like I said, I grew up here in the States. I grew up in California, so I've been here since I was 3 months old. But I mean, I definitely didn't see any sort of representation for, decades of my life, not only in pop culture, but just even in schooling and knowing about history. I took it upon myself. It's really, great that in recent years, there's more stories out there, or even just like awareness of the Chinese Exclusion Act and just talking about what everybody went through. I growing up in California, being of Japanese ancestry, of course, I knew about all the Japanese American internment and actually know people whose families, were interned. But yeah, there's a lot of people who don't know anything about that, and so I think that, there's been some great documentaries in recent years, like one from PBS on the whole Asian American experience. There's some great dramatic series like Warrior, where it recounts kind of the whole lead up to the Chinese Exclusion Act, where when all the influx of Chinese immigrants coming into California for the gold rush in the 1850s, and how much animosity was turned towards them by white Americans. And so, I think little by little we're starting to hear about it in the general pop culture, but I think there needs to be more awareness. I think that schooling, history, and just teaching everybody, because it is an American experience after all.
Totally. I remember in school, like AP US history, studying so much about like these white men and just like having a day or two on like the Chinese Exclusion Act. And, just kind of like it kind of just being face value. Like we never really explored why that happened and just like the racism. And so I'm so curious, Tyler, you growing up in Canada, what was your experience around learning about the Asian experience in school?
It was very short-lived. Like you mentioned, like 1 or 2 days. But we did touch up here on the West Coast. There was a railroad that was built in the Rocky Mountains from Vancouver to Calgary, which is, if you've driven that road, it's incredible to see. But at the same time, if you're building a railroad, it's extremely dangerous. And there were Chinese immigrants that came over that were plucked and were like, hey, you're going to go work on the railroad now. And I think it was about 15,000 of them. And out of that 15,000, about 600 or 700 died while they were building this thing. So it's stuff like that that we've learned. But it just kind of starts and stops. There's nothing like continuing about it. It's just like, here's some facts and let's go learn about something else. So yeah, I think there should be an ongoing conversation and some knowledge that's passed on, and continue to share. And I think that's, as an Asian myself, I'm going to be doing that for my friends that don't know about this. I'm going to be spreading the word and trying to educate my friends and my wife's side of the family about this stuff, because not a lot of people know about it.
I've been following the news, and there's just this conversation around critical race theory, and some people feeling, I think, a little bit threatened by learning about these kinds of things. I'm so curious, like, what do you all think about that? Like, why do you think people are so afraid about learning the ugly parts of our country?
I think it's a really hard reality to face. Like, talking about racism, talking about discrimination is not a comfortable conversation to hold. And it's hard for a reason. I think it showcases the fact that the discomfort around these conversations is further proof of the fact that they even need to be held and have to happen. I mean, even going back to like, I oftentimes with my own audience have to educate them around different historical things that have happened and why we still have racism and face these sorts of things in our day-to-day lives. Like, I think the model minority myth is something that I actively think about really presently in my life, and am trying to even educate the people that follow me on the origins of it and how that was a term that was made by a white man to further the divide between the Black community and the Asian community. And like, this is something that has been happening for a very long time. And that's a really uncomfortable reality to face, to unpack the complexities of racial discrimination, not only between white people and Asian people, but between POC. Like, it's a very complicated conversation and very uncomfortable, but very necessary too. Mm-hmm.
I totally feel what you said. And I feel like along with the model minority, there is this narrative that the Asian community is apathetic to politics sometimes, to the things that are going on. What are your thoughts around that? Why do you think that happens?
I think that as far as apathy, I think that hopefully that's going to be starting to change now, because a lot of people, especially with the recent violence, more people are becoming mobilized into looking out for their own communities and whatnot. Why has there been so much apathy? I think in some ways there's just so much, a lot of people staying within their communities, only possibly seeing their city council member who is of Asian descent, only dealing with their very small nucleus in terms of their geographic location. And then beyond that, I think it is, there's so many first generation, second generation immigrant families that they put so much energy into assimilating that there is definitely kind of the sons and daughters are the fruition of this assimilation. And so there is not, I won't say there's not giving back to their communities, but they've assimilated, or at least think they have, to the point where, now we're getting to a point of reckoning where there is a rude awakening that maybe we think we've assimilated, but we're still the outsiders, and I think so. Now I think that people are going to be a little more mobilized. I don't know if that answered your question, why there's apathy, but hopefully that will change.
Yeah, and I think what I started to think about when you were answering that question is that, like, let's be real, like, as people, my parents are immigrants, as people who come from communities that are immigrant, who, let's say, aren't white, like, there is a survival, right? Like, we have to survive, right? And assimilation is a big topic, but can change really happen if we don't challenge if we don't challenge these norms and we don't come together as a community? Like, what do you think? Like, is it about the numbers?
On my end, with my family, I mean, we had no Japanese community when we arrived to California. We arrived to a small town, Fresno, California, and it was an agricultural town. My father was in the textiles trade. He's an expat. His company sent him here to to be a regional manager of his company. So, my story is completely different than the tens or hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans in California who came here for a better life and, work the agricultural fields of Central California and whatnot. So I think that, speaking for myself, we didn't really have a community, but I believe that there is a longing, especially when I look at the Japanese American community, like in Southern California. They do the Obon Festival. There is some hearkening back to getting to their cultures and whatnot, and so that is nice to see, because I didn't have that. I think that they, in general, I think that again, given all the violence, the recent stuff going on, and the memory of past bad things happening, I think that a lot of people are starting to get a little more active and mobilized, and really trying to get in touch with their heritage, for sure.
Speaking of community, all of you are a part of the music industry. I'd love to hear more about how it's been for you. So Tyler, I want to start with you. How has your experience been in the music industry?
When I first started around 9.5 years ago, I was pretty, naive and ignorant to the whole scene. I thought, this is going to be hard for sure, but I'm just going to put my head down and do it. And I was just solely focused on the music. Over the past couple of years, I've had a chance to kind of look up and kind of pay attention to everything, and noticing that, I'm being chosen for certain things just for a checklist, for a diversity checklist. It's not because of, oh, this guy's really, really good. It's like, okay, we want to diversify our show or our whatever, and okay, he's cool, like, let's put him in. So it's been eye-opening to see these things pop up when, I just thought it was hard work. And I'm also seeing my contemporary artists, they're getting opportunity, and I don't want to blame it on race. Like, maybe there's something else going on, but at the same time, I can't help but to think, maybe it's because I'm Asian that I'm not getting these opportunities. It's hard for me not to think that way, but it's difficult. It's difficult.
I can talk about my own experience. I think I'm only 20 years old, and I've been working in the music industry for 3 years. And so I'm very new to this entire space. But I think one thing that was apparently clear to me when I started working full time within the entertainment industry, especially within my own space of indie pop music, is how white the space is. And I think that was something very new to me. I grew up in Oakland, California, and I was very thankful to be surrounded by the heritage of Chinese Americans that, like, my family has, and the culture too, and not to feel othered by my experience and existence as a mixed race Asian American. But yeah, it was very jarring. And I think that this is something, finding peers that share similar experiences to me and can have dialogues and conversations around our racial experience within a very predominantly white male dominated field, has been very, very comforting. But I honestly think it's something that's been really new to me, just because I haven't been able to actively seek out those spaces until probably this year, when there's a larger conversation around AAPI and Asian American identity that was kickstarted by unfortunate events and continued racism. Yeah.
On my end, being a percussionist and a jazz artist, I haven't felt necessarily. I may look up and notice that I'm the only East Asian person in the room, but really, when I moved out to LA right after college, when I really started working initially as a sideman and a hired gun as a percussionist, that's when, I'm definitely like the only person on stage that is of Asian descent in many of the types of situations I'm in. I started out doing a lot of R&B and hip hop on percussion. And so I was definitely like, when I toured with Whitney Houston, I was in her band the entire time. I was the only Asian person, I think, on the entire tour, on the world tour. In the studio, I did a lot of hip hop. So working with Dr. Dre, again, only Asian person there. And then now I'm mostly working the rock and roll world. I tour with Fleetwood Mac. And again, as far as on stage, obviously I'm the only Asian person on stage with Fleetwood Mac. But, and there's a few East Asian Americans behind the scenes. But for the most part, I'm pretty much the only one there, kind of like, in the pop rock touring realm. So it is, for the most part, like Tyler said, like you'd like to think it was because of merit and your hard work. I know in some cases I've gotten major tours where I don't know if I specifically got the job because I was Asian, but it definitely did check off a box when they were looking to like have a multicultural band. That worked in the case. I toured with Lionel Richie for a long period of time, and same thing. He was revamping his entire band. He wanted a younger band, and it was great that all of a sudden he's got, African American, Caucasian, and Asians on stage, backing him up. It looked great, you know. And then on the flip side, I've auditioned for major artists where I know, especially playing Latin percussion, I kind of walked in and I'm like, I'm not going to get the gig. And I didn't, even if I was the most prepared and I was the one who, played the audition the best. I just knew that I wouldn't get the gig just because they were, again, casting. And so it's worked for me and against me. So it is what it is.
There's a lot of people out there that don't know how it feels to be an artist, that don't know how it feels to be like the only person who looks like you in the industry. When you get that one gig and you're the only person who has it, how does that feel? Do you feel happy or do you feel sad and wish that there were more people like you on the team?
I feel like there's a reluctance that follows with it. I think that there's like at least in my experience, there's the knowledge that yes, you were probably picked for this based off of your identity, but how can I use this opportunity to push the envelope a little bit forward and open up the doors for more people to not be a checklist for a company and when they're trying to achieve diversity on a screen or on a stage. So I think it's bittersweet. It's like an emotion of being like, all right, okay, I'm going to use this opportunity and try and spin it as positively as I possibly can. But it shouldn't be like this. Like, it shouldn't need to start that way. It's kind of my feelings around it.
This is something that happens a lot in Latin music. You're a brown person, you look Latin, they're like, that person does Latin, even if they do like dream pop or like bedroom pop. Like, does that happen with the Asian music community?
I think on a bunch of interviews that I've had actually going into like every song release, I've on my second album, which I released in 2018, I ended up putting my Chinese name on my album artwork. And because when I did that, every single person that interviewed me was like, so do you have Asian instruments in your music? Like, do you have gongs and do you have Chinese violin? And I sat there and I thought, like, why are they asking me this? Like, just because of my artwork and my background and my race, why does that mean I have to put Asian instruments in my music? Which I thought was very interesting and odd at the same time. Yeah. I
think that, well, I'm completely surrounded by Asian instruments, but yeah. I do play other instruments as well. But I think that there is like, I've gotten hired, especially as a sideman, where they're like, oh, we need a Japanese taiko drum player, so we're going to call you, which is great. Then I get to have all these various fantastic opportunities. At the same time, like, I'm not a professional taiko drummer. I know I got the call because I'm Japanese, but then I do have a little bit of a complex sometimes of just, this gig probably should have gone to somebody who actually like they live and die playing taiko drums as far as like a very traditional thing, So I take the opportunity, but like the bottom line is I have to make sure I pay as much reverence and realize, like I have the platform. So let me do it justice and do it honor and try my best. And so, that's what I try to do on my end. So
I think in my own experiences, I never grew up thinking that I could do music largely because I didn't see anybody that looked like me. And especially in spaces like pop music, I don't think that I ever saw Asian Americans being a pioneering voice within the sphere of pop culture. I think now bedroom pop, specifically in the indie space, there's a diversification that's happening with new artists coming up. We have like Olivia Rodrigo being a huge example for Filipino people, and seeing her story being showcased, I think is really exciting. But that wasn't something that I grew up seeing in any capacity. So I think people don't look at me and assume that I write any music one way or the other, just because I don't think Asian people are often viewed as creatives, which is sad, but it's true. And trying to kind of like, I have conversations all the time with people being like, oh, what do you study in college? And I'll tell them, oh, I didn't actually go to college. Like I do music full time. They're like, oh, then do you play like a classical instrument? And I'm like, no, I play the ukulele and I sing. And so it's just this constant battle of really surprising people about the fact that Asian people are artists too, and we do this as a job and not just because our mom told us to when we were little. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. And I love that this came up because I feel like there is a world in which an Asian artist will use Asian instruments. And in that same world, there is an Asian artist that won't, right? There's nuance. Like you can't assume that an artist will have a certain instrument because of their background. You can't assume someone goes to college. But mxmtoon, you brought up something huge, which is pop culture and the Asian community within the pop culture, Olivia Rodrigo, which is, being talked about a lot right now. But I'd also love to bring in K-pop, which has risen substantially in the last few years. What do y'all think about the rise of K-pop?
I personally love it. I think I think it's awesome. I think it's about time. Actually, we started listening to K-pop when I was in high school, and that was like the beginning of this whole journey diving into that music scene. So I'm glad it's getting the recognition it deserves. It took some time, but it's finally here.
It definitely took some time. I think, it's been there. So why not have global, awareness of it and global fandom? I think it's great. Definitely.
I've been a big fan of K-pop for years, and I am so excited that it's now in the pop culture like awareness, just because I think as an Asian person, even though I'm not Korean, it was so cool to see Asian culture be accepted by a Western audience and not to feel so othered by my existence and my experience of being Asian. Like, how cool. I think it's just really neat when you see aspects of things that you appreciate and understand as a part of your experience be something widely accepted and acknowledged by a larger group of people. Mm-hmm.
Totally. And I think you're right, finally. And I think one of the most amazing things about it is that you have people who don't even speak Korean sing in Korean. And I think for such a long time, we're used to, having artists who sing in English, like the Beatles tour the world and having people sing in English, but now we have people singing in Korean. And I think it's about time that people are catching up. And part of the reason they're catching up is because of the internet, right? Because YouTube and because the streaming platforms. I'm so curious to know how the internet has helped your careers.
I never would have had this be my job, I think, without the internet, largely because I think the entrance into the entertainment industry is something very gatekept. And both my parents are teachers. And so I grew up never thinking that it would be a possibility for me to work on something like this as my job. So without the internet, I don't know what I would have done. I think it allowed me the space to tell my story and for people to find me without the need to be backed by somebody like with a label behind me. I think it really gave me the opportunity to be as honest and open about my story and my identity with people. And I feel like I got really lucky because it was at a time where people were looking for that and audiences are starting to really determine which artists they want to see at the forefront of pop culture. And I got really lucky with people seeming to resonate with my own story. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the internet has become kind of a great equalizer. At first, I think it was looked upon with a lot of fear just because it was kind of like, oh, great, now we're going to be flooded with like too many options almost, it's like, how do you sift through all this? But at the end of the day, like the cream is rising to the top in terms, and not just of quality, but just that something that is resounding with people, and I think it's fantastic. As far as for me, I don't know. I started my career like way before social media. I think that it has enhanced it. I think if anything, it's just more about global reach. That I'll just be walking somewhere and somebody will come up to me and it's like, oh, I saw this video of you, just random of you drumming with somebody or something. It's not even like one that may have gotten like the most hits, but just like absolutely random. That always just kind of blows me away, you know. So definitely, I think it's just global reach, and then and just awareness of your story.
Yeah, global reach is a massive part as being an artist. You want to inspire as many people as you can, and social media and the internet has definitely made that more of a possibility than it ever has been. So I agree with that totally.
So we've been talking a lot about the music industry, and I have a really big question to ask you all. And you don't have to have the answer, but I just love to hear your ideas around how we create a lasting safe space and support network within the music industry in which AAP artists can thrive.
How about we do, there's the Grammys, there's the Latin Grammys, Asia Grammys.
Maybe good pitch.
No, but yeah, I think like we're doing this first of all is a great thing to be doing right now, and connecting one another, connecting Asian artists together, and just telling our stories. I think that'll definitely make the space a lot more safe. Most definitely. And also just like Tyler said, just awareness of each other. I mean, shout out to AAPImusicians.com. It's a new website that just came on board at the top of this month, at the top of, Asian AAPI Heritage Month. But I've learned about so many other Asian musicians and recording artists and people even working behind the scenes through this website. And they basically showcased 2 or 3 different people every day of this month so far. And so I think all that goes to show, like, we need to know about each other. I didn't know, like practically any of those people. And so it's just really about like, we need to build our own community. So many of us have been just working so hard like this, and just trying to move forward that now that we know a little bit more about each other's stories, and even the awareness of that we're there, that we're in these spaces, that we can kind of seek each other out and have a forum between us as well.
Yeah, totally. I think again, this panel is one of the first steps towards that, is really just making spaces for people to talk about their experiences so far and broadening the perspectives I think people have of what it's like for Asian Americans and Asian people throughout the entertainment industry, throughout any sort of business. And I think it's wonderful we have a month to talk about the experiences of being Asian, but it just goes to show that we have we really need these conversations to keep happening, as we do with a lot of other issues and dialogues that we're trying to hold. So yeah, just making spaces for people to share their stories so we can keep giving people more perspective about the diversity of voices that is out there.
Totally. And Tyler, I love that you brought up Latin Grammys and Grammys, because there has also been Asian representation in Latin Grammys. When Tony Zucker won his Latin Grammy a couple of years ago, that was really amazing. There are a lot of Asian people that are also Latinx. So I think, yeah, definitely seeing more of that nuance, I think, will really help people understand that Asian people have a lot of diversity even within themselves. So I'd love to end on this note, because it's a great note. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.